Hey folks, this is my workbench, and today I'm going to duplicate the leg vise that I have on it. I've already got a working leg vise, but I want to make a copy of this for my friend Sean Stone's workbench. He's got a 2x4 style workbench that we're going to adapt to add a leg vise just like this. Now at the time of making my workbench I did not have a lathe, so I got this particular kit from Dima Gamma Unov. He's got the original design for this particular leg vise. To make mine though, I'm using this chunk of walnut, just a small piece of it. Sean Stone acquired this from Matt Cremona, and then I acquired this scaffold leveling leg from my buddy Wayne Brown. Together that's going to be the actual working mechanism of the leg vise. But for the chop, I'm going to do this exact same thing that I did on mine, and that is cut 2 pieces of 2x10 pine and laminate those together. So first step in my process is to cut the 2 pieces at the miter saw station. Then I can take them over to the jointer with my guard removed to make basically a wide 8-inch rabbet. These boards are too wide for my jointer, but I can take a full width pass on the jointer and then take these over to the planer and run that essentially 8-inch wide rabbet over a piece of plywood to plane flat the opposite face of what was just jointed. Once that face is planed nice and flat, then I can remove the piece of plywood and cut the opposite face in the planer, and that will leave 2 parallel and flat faces that I can glue together. Gluing up the pieces is pretty much straightforward. I am using a different glue on this piece though. I'm not using my traditional Type-On 2 or Type-On 3. Instead I'm using something called MPA2, and I'm just trying it out from a recommendation from somebody else, and so far I really like it. It dries crystal clear. It doesn't leave any yellow or brown lines like Type-On 2 or 3 does. Some may see that as a disadvantage. I see it as an advantage because you don't see any glue lines whatsoever. Now, like I said, this isn't my design. I'm replicating the hub that I received from Dima Gamma Unov. He has plans available for this particular leg vise, and I will post a link to that video in the description below. But it's one of those things, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel here. It's just a very strong leg vise setup, so I'm going to replicate it. In order to do so, I had to remove mine and then get the proper dimensions to mark out on the walnut. Now for the walnut, I wanted to minimize the amount of wasted material, so on this large chunk, I just cut a little corner out, and I had to make this in 2 different direction passes at the bandsaw, and then I could take it over to the miter saw and make sure that the 2 opposite faces were nice and parallel, and then just clean it up a little bit more to make it a little bit more manageable on the lathe. Once on the lathe, the process is pretty straightforward. I'm using a roughing gouge to rough the square blank into a cylinder, and then I can use the parting tool to establish a tenon on one side. The purpose of the tenon is so that it can be mounted in a chuck, and this is necessary in order to drill a hole for the screw, which will eventually be on the other side. But before drilling the hole for the screw, I can make the tenon that will basically sit inside the leg chop itself. And I know what size hole I'm going to drill in the chop, so I drilled a scrap piece of wood and used that as a gauge to determine whether or not my tenon was properly sized. Once it was, then I can make the appropriate size tenon at its full depth. And right before drilling the hole, there is a little, I guess, keyway that is necessary for the capture ring on the leg vise. Finally, the screw hole can be drilled out, and I'm using a Forstner bit, making sure to clear out the chips and the shavings as I go. This got quite a bit hot. I wasn't expecting it to get as hot as it did, but there was no damage. Now the whole assembly can be flipped around in the chuck, and I'm not worried about the chuck jaws damaging that side of the hub, because all of that's going to be hidden when it's all said and done anyway. Once the final shaping is done, a little bit of sanding can take place, and this piece is ready to be taken off the lathe. I messed up a little bit here, a couple different things. Number one, I drilled a slightly oversized hole because it was the closest Forstner bit that I had. This created a little bit of wobble inside the hole, but I centered it the best I could, and in the end, it worked out all right. Second thing I messed up is I should have drilled the handle hole on the drill press before I glued it into before I glued the screw into the hub. I didn't do that. It all worked out in the end, but I just had a process error in this particular stage. Like I said, the screw that I'm using is actually a scaffold leveling leg, and there's a plate at the bottom that needs to be cut off. It's pretty easy to do with a cutoff wheel and an angle grinder. And then for a little bit of extra support and stability to help back up the epoxy, I drilled a hole through the bottom side of the hub and through the screw itself for a metal pin. Now, I don't really have a good metal pin that I could use, so I used it's an 8-inch nail. I guess this is called a spike once you get to that length, and I'll later just grind this off once the epoxy cures. While the epoxy was curing on the screw, I focused my attention back to the leg chop, and there's a little bit of planer snipe on both faces of the chop, so I just cleaned that off really quick with a hand plane. And then to make this nice and square, I went back to the jointer. Now the wide faces were already jointed and planed parallel, so all I had to do was clean up one edge and then run that through the table saw to clean up the opposite edge. And to allow more room for operations such as cutting like half-blind dovetails where your handsaw will be used at an angle, I cut a chamfer on the outside top edge of the chop, and then also cut 2 tapers starting 12 inches from the top on either side to kind of give it a little bit better appearance, just make it look thinner as the chop went to the floor. The bandsaw cuts are rough as they normally are, so I cleaned them up with a hand plane. This is the longest one I have, which is just a low angle jack plane, and just a couple passes and it was nice and smooth. Now I also took the time to cut the spike or the pin out of the leg vise hub and just ground it nice and smooth, and it turned out really well. In order for the screw and the hub to go through the chop, a counterbore through hole needs to be drilled, and the depth of the counterbore needs to be so that once the hub is inserted and the retaining ring is in place, all of the clamping pressure will be on the bottom of the hub inside the chop and not on the retaining ring. For the retaining washer or retaining ring, typically a metal split washer is used, but I wanted to be a little bit more custom with this, so instead I resawed a piece of hickory, just a small square, to the appropriate thickness, and then cleaned it up with a hand plane to remove some of the bandsaw marks. And then just to give it a little bit more visual appeal, I added a slight chamfer to all 4 of the edges. Then a through hole can be drilled in the middle of the hickory, and to make the cut a little bit cleaner, I didn't go all the way through from one side. I flipped it over and finished the cut from the other side. Once the hole is made, then the entire piece can be split in half at the bandsaw. I chose to use the bandsaw for this because it has the thinnest kerf, and then I cleaned up the kerf lines with a hand plane so that once it is in place around the hub, it's functioning the way it should, but it's also kind of invisible. The seam is very difficult to see. Just for test fit purposes, I used washer head screws to secure the hickory to the chop and make sure that the retaining ring was working as it should. And it wasn't until this point that I realized I didn't drill the handle holes yet, and I should have done it sooner. So in order for me to line up the 2 entry holes, because I want to drill this halfway from each side, I used a piece of paper to determine the circumference and then divided that length in half, and then I could have those 2 points, the halfway mark and then the full circumference mark, to mark onto the hub for the 2 entry points of the drill press. And then drilling this out on the drill press was a little bit nerve-wracking at this stage because I'd already glued in the screw, and if I screwed up, then, well, I screwed up. Luckily, I didn't, and this turned out way better than I thought it would. The 2 holes lined up perfectly, and I couldn't have asked for better results. I guess it's a happy, lucky accident that turned out this well. For the handle, I again mimicked Dima's design, just a very simple spindle turning, and for the wood I used hickory. This is a live edge piece of hickory from a larger slab, and it had a little bit of spalting going on, so it turned out really, really well. Once the shape was determined, I just went ahead and sanded it while it was on the lathe, and then parted off one of the handles on on one side. The small handle piece was taken to the drill press and a recess was drilled to accept the rest of the handle, and then this can be screwed on from the other side once the handle is inserted in the hub. And lastly, I secured the handle in the halfway position with a single screw, and this just makes the handle a little bit more accessible no matter which position it's in for the operator. And also, like I said, this is for a friend of mine, Sean Stone. So tune in next week and I'll go over to his shop and install this in a regular 2x4 secured to the wall style workbench. You don't necessarily have to have a traditional style workbench if you don't have room for them. So if you're interested in the installation of this, and also to see this with a little bit of finish on it and see that handle just really come to life, then be sure to check out that video. When it's available, I'll post a link in the description below. Until next time, guys, take care, thanks for watching, and you guys have a great day.